Okay, we'll try this again. I switched cameras. So I thought I would read you guys a short little story here. Yeah, it doesn't have a title. We'll just call it Hank. Okay. A full sun was blazing. The air was thick with humidity. Each breath seemed to burn his lungs. Hank couldn't help but constantly remind himself that Texas is no place to be homeless, especially when you haven't had any real food in 3 days. Still, this was the current state of his life. His frustrations, although they were many, could not change this one bit. It hadn't always been this way. Once Hank had had a good job and a decent apartment, food was aplenty. He had cases of cold craft beer to drink, a serious girlfriend, a car payment, and an anime meme page that he moderated with some of his buddies. Life was good. Life was really good. But sometimes you don't know what you have until it disappears. Like so many young men, Hank thought that he was invincible. He felt death-proof. Nothing could bring him down. He was smart. He was sharp. He could beat the odds. He could party with the best of them and still keep up a normal life. He was nothing like his uncle, Norm. He wasn't weak. He wasn't washed up. Good old Uncle Norm was an ex-meth head, the convict brother of his father, the youngest son, the one who worried Grandma sick all those years. Because he couldn't maintain his partying, he had to attend those AA meetings down the street at the Episcopalian church. The one with the female priest and the grimy stained glass windows. The one with the big parking lot where he used to practice skateboarding tricks as a teenager while shotgunning beers with his buddies. Hank had been to that church before quite a few times, but never for an AA meeting. Grandma was a faithful member of the church even after they went full-blown liberal on her. Sometimes Hank would take her to Sunday service after her driver's license was finally suspended, but he never paid attention. Religion didn't really do it for him. If anything, he considered himself an atheist or maybe an agnostic on a good day. Church was cell phone time. It definitely wasn't paying attention time. Grandma was without a doubt Hank's favorite person in the entire world. He never knew his grandpa, but Grandma was a saint. She was one of those old school types who always made sure you left her house with a overstuffed belly and a big cheesy grin. When you were around her, you could tell that she cared about you. There was no pretense, just empathy and compassion. There was no ill will. Hank missed that as he roamed the streets alone. After 3 days without a meal, he especially missed Grandma's world-famous mashed potatoes, so creamy, fluffy like springtime clouds. Every stomach rumble was cruel. Every dehydration headache taunted him. He wished that he could call Grandma. Her house was only a few blocks away from the park that he slept at last night. If he huffed it, he knew that he could get to her house in like 20 minutes. Having grown up in the area, he knew all the legal and illegal shortcuts. But he didn't call her. He wouldn't. She couldn't see him in this current state. It would be too hard, too shameful. He was like Uncle Norm before he got sober. Homeless, friendless, penniless, hopeless. Besides, his phone was dead anyways. It was really dead. No juice, no service. At this point, it was a glorified paperweight. He didn't even know why he kept it. Maybe he tried to sell it someday for a couple bucks. He reached in his pants pocket to grab a cigarette. As he reached in, all that he pulled out was some lint and a crumpled up pack. He cussed out loud, remembering that he smoked the last one last night. In a moment of frustration, he threw the pack on the ground and stomped on it. He said to himself, "Stupid nicotine. I never should have started smoking these dumb things in the first place. What a waste." Still, he desperately wanted one. It had taken him half a day to panhandle enough cash for a pack of low-grade cigarettes and a couple tall boys of cheap malt liquor. The price would have covered a cheeseburger combo at the nearby fast food spot, but some random construction worker guy had bought him a bag of chips and a granola bar earlier that day. This justified him buying beer and smokes instead. The snacks the construction guy had given him and the beer silenced his hunger pains for a moment. The cigarettes gave him about 20 moments of light-headed apathy. Plus, everybody knows that a cold beer is the best antidote for a hot Texas afternoon. And what goes better with beer than a cigarette? The combo was classic. It was sacrosanct. As he thought that, he chuckled. Even in his homelessness, he was still a bit pretentious. Some things never change. The fact that he had bought cigarettes and booze instead of food would have made a normal person question their life choices, but it didn't move Hank. It didn't even faze him. When you have a habit to feed, you feed it, not your body. He could tell himself that he'd act differently next time, but he knew that that wouldn't be the case. He wanted what he wanted. This had left him starving before, and it would do so again. Once more, his stomach roared. He made his way over to the shady side of the park. Here he knew he could find a picnic table to sit at and a brick ashtray full of cigarette butts. Maybe he'd find something smokable. Either way, he needed a break from the harsh sun. His fourth-generation Scottish skin was starting to peel. He dug through the ashtray like an archaeologist on some noble dig, but all he found were a few burnt-up menthols and lipstick-stained cloves. So he sat down inside, defeated but shielded from the sun. As he stared across the park, he spotted two teenagers holding hands on a plaid blanket. The sight made him think about Rachel, his now ex-girlfriend. Just like his career and earthly possessions, he drank Rachel away. If he were sober, they probably would have married by now, but because he spent majority of his time drinking with his buddies, she left. She didn't want to support his growing alcohol problem, and that made him bitter. Young love is a beautiful thing, and Rachel was the best thing he'd ever seen. He wanted her from the moment he first saw her, junior year. Once he worked up the nerve to talk to her, they hit it off. From that point on, they were inseparable. For a long time, they had what you could call a storybook romance. He was kind, she was receptive. He tried to put her feelings first, and she respected him most of the time. Yet even in high school, she couldn't stand drunk Hank. Once a hard drink hit his lips, he became a different man. No longer thoughtful, no longer kind, just loud and obnoxious. Hank knew that Rachel felt this way, but it never stopped him from tying a good one on. If anything, it got him that much drunker. Nothing fills up the shot glass quicker than guilt and shame. Nothing gets a drunk drunker than resentment. The moment Rachel walked out the apartment door with teary eyes, Hank was filled with rage and depression, and this led to the bender to end all benders. He had gone on benders before, and Rachel always took him back, but this time the bender didn't stop. One by one, it has taken away everything good in his life. First the job, then the car, and finally his apartment. The only thing he has left is a backpack and a few sets of clothes, all dignity gone, lonely as sin, but alive. Eventually, Hank snapped back to reality and began heading towards the local grocery store to panhandle or maybe try and steal some tall cans of beer. As he passed the spot where the teenage lover sat, he found a black leather wallet lying on the ground. Naturally, he picked it up and checked it for money. Inside it, he found a crisp $20 bill. Overjoyed, he snatched the bill and dropped the wallet back on the ground. Again, Hank would be confronted with a great decision. Would he buy food to satisfy his stomach or booze to quiet his other hunger? He was starving, but man, he was thirsty. Thirsty for beer or whiskey. It had been at least 12 hours since his last drink, and he was starting to become irritable. He needed to drink or sleep, but the day was still young. $20 was enough to buy food for a few days, or he could spend it all on some cigarettes and a liter of nasty whiskey. The type of whiskey that makes you forget about your depression and empty stomach. The type of whiskey that makes you not miss your ex-girlfriend or your grandma or your cushy job. That magical whiskey. The question now was whether Hank really had a choice. Food would definitely make him feel better physically, and alcohol would only make his depression worse. Sure, it would help him numb out until he passed out in the park, but he'd eventually wake up hungover, angry, day 4 with no food, dehydrated and alone. 30 minutes went by, and Hank exited the grocery store with a brown paper bag in his hand. He leaned against the outside wall and lit up a cigarette, closing his eyes for that first heavenly drag. A rush of warm apathy ran through his tired brain. Next, he pulled a large plastic bottle with a handle from the bag. He twisted the lid off with determination. Slowly, he raised the bottle to his awaiting lips. As soon as he did this, he heard a voice from across the parking lot. The voice cried out, "Come to me, all you weary and burden laden, and I will give you rest." Hank had heard this before. It was Thomas, the street preacher, the town religious nut who regularly harassed women outside the abortion clinic, the same wacko who liked to hold up fire and brimstone sign outside of all the professional sporting events. Hank normally did whatever he could to avoid people like Thomas, but today he obviously wasn't successful, so he shrugged in annoyance. Thomas cried out again, but this time his words were different. "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost." Hank heard the words clearly. He knew what book they were from, and he wanted nothing to do with them. Religion was for the weak and manipulatable. He was homeless and smelly, but he wasn't weak. He certainly wasn't weary. He was smarter than the next guy. He was witty. He was sharp and had a full liter of booze to drink. No obnoxious street preacher would ruin this moment of triumph with their outdated fairy tales. Although Thomas was across the way, he knew that Hank was in earshot. He knew that Hank could hear him. So he turned towards Hank and cried out like a Puritan of old, "Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit." Upon hearing this, Hank thought to himself, "I'll fill myself with spirits, all right, a whole liter of them, and then I'll probably go do some debauchery." With this thought, Hank snickered. He was proud of himself for being so witty. He thought to himself again, "Maybe I'll go take a key to Thomas's car. Maybe I'll stumble over to Rachel's new place and throw a river rock through the window. That's what she gets for leaving me. Or maybe I'll go back to the park and pass out like a good transient. Whatever I do, I won't be alone. I've got my drink and my smokes to keep me company. Once I reach oblivion, I'll be free of this second-hand town." With this thought, Hank took a prolonged swig of booze and headed down the street to the fading sound of Thomas's voice. "Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine." All right, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get back to work. You guys have a good one. Bye.